John Ross was a complete bust in the NFL, and now he's already retired. Despite being the 9th overall pick at the 2017 draft, he never even had 1,000 yards in the pros. John Ross was a complete disaster. So how did he even go that high coming out of college? What went so wrong in the NFL, and who did the Bengals miss out on by taking him instead? Coming out of high school, John Ross was a 3-star recruit and the 60th best wideout in the class. He decided to commit to Washington, where as a freshman, he did play in all 13 games. He only had 16 receptions for 200 yards and a touchdown, but he really did dominate as a returnman. He returned 31 kicks and had 720 yards and a touchdown. He had a much bigger role for the Huskies as a sophomore and even started 4 games at cornerback. Again, he played in 13 games, but he caught 17 passes for 370 yards and 4 touchdowns. In his 38 kick returns, he had 940 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then at corner, he had 16 tackles, a pass defended, and an interception. He really did do everything, and he looked like he was starting to show a lot of promise. But unfortunately, he suffered a torn ACL, and it caused him to miss the entire 2015 season. But his comeback the following year was crazy. He was more of a receiver than a returnman for the first time. In 14 games, he caught 81 passes for 1,150 yards and 17 touchdowns. He was named a first-team All-American and the Pac-12 Player of the Year. He decided to declare for the 2017 NFL Draft, and all anybody could talk about was how he ran a 4.22 40-yard dash at the Combine. The time beat Chris Johnson for the fastest time in Combine history. Ross was already projected to be a first-round pick, but then he shot up draft boards even more, and the Bengals decided to take him at 9. His first season in Cincinnati was awful, and he struggled to see the field. He played in just 3 games and received 1 touch all year. It was a run for 12 yards, and he fumbled on the play. His second year, he just couldn't produce. He only missed 3 games, but he still finished with just 21 receptions for 200 yards and 7 touchdowns. Now, in 2019, he actually started the season off right. In the first 2 games of the year, Ross had 11 catches for 270 yards and 3 touchdowns. Well, he didn't stay hot. He only played in 8 games, and he had 500 yards and 3 touchdowns. In 2020, he had another tough year. He requested a trade, but it didn't happen. He was a healthy scratch for 5 games and suffered a season-ending foot injury ahead of the Bengals' Week 9 matchup. He finished the season with just 2 receptions for 17 yards. It honestly looked like John Ross's time in the NFL was over because he really was that bad and just couldn't stay healthy. But then the Giants took a shot on him. John Ross signed a 1-year, $2.5 million contract with New York. He started the season on IR, but he was taken off by week 4. Injuries to Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard helped Ross see the field. Over the next 10 games, he had 11 receptions for 220 yards and a touchdown, and then he didn't even play at all in the last 4 games of the season. After taking 2022 away from football, Ross signed a reserve contract with the Chiefs. Nearly 7 months later, he retired at only 27 years old. In his 5 years in the league, John Ross had just 62 receptions for less than 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. John Ross made a lot of money in his career, all because of a 40-yard dash. He was really fast, but he was never anything more than just a wasted pick for the Bengals. Well, at that 9th overall pick, who could they have taken instead? So John Ross went 9th, and then literally with the next pick, the Chiefs took Patrick Mahomes. Now, missing out on Mahomes by a single pick is brutal, but it definitely stings the Bengals less than anybody because Joe Burrow is right behind him as far as the best quarterbacks in the league go. Still, Mahomes is the best of the best. He's won 2 MVPs and won 2 Super Bowls. He burst onto the scene in his second season in the pros and passed for a league-leading 50 touchdowns with over 5,000 yards and 12 interceptions. This past season, he led the league in touchdowns again with 41 and had an NFL best 5,200 250 yards while throwing just 12 picks. He's as good as they come, and it's absolutely hilarious that he was taken one spot after a huge bust. And actually, the 4 picks after Ross all went on to be Pro Bowlers. Marshawn Lattimore went at 11 to the Saints. He made an immediate impact in New Orleans in 2017, and even won Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's been a Pro Bowler 4 times and got a massive 5-year, $97.6 million extension in 2021. He's been great, although he is coming off of a disappointing year where he did miss time with a lacerated kidney. Then with the next pick, Deshaun Watson. Now, Joe Burrow is much better than Deshaun Watson at this point in their careers, so everything worked out, but Watson was still incredible at one point. In his last full season, Watson led the league with 4,800 yards and passed for 33 touchdowns with only 7 interceptions. Of course, everything went downhill fast in Houston after a bunch of sexual assault allegations, and he was eventually traded and sent to the Browns, where he signed a massive 5-year, $230 million deal, fully guaranteed. At 13, the Cardinals took Hassan Reddick, who is at least worth bringing up. Arizona declined his 5th-year option, and he went on to spend a year with the Panthers before he got a big 3-year, $45 million deal from the Eagles in 2022. He went on to help them make the Super Bowl and was a Pro Bowler and second-team All-Pro. Then a couple picks later, back-to-back defensive studs went off the board. The Ravens took Marlon Humphrey. He's developed into a top corner. He's been a Pro Bowler 3 times, was a first-team All-Pro in 2019, and got a 5-year, $97.5 million extension in 2020. Then with the next selection, Washington took now one of the best defensive tackles in the league, Jonathan Allen. A few more defensive studs went later in the round, like Tre'Davious White and TJ Watt. At 23rd overall, the Giants took Evan Ingram. Now, if you remember, he was really good as a rookie with 722 yards and 6 touchdowns, but that ended up being his best of 5 years in New York. Signed with the Jags last offseason and just had a career-high 766 yards and got a big 3-year extension. He wasn't even the best tight end in the draft, though. It was George Kittle, who went in the 5th round. Obviously, the Bengals were looking to add a receiving threat, and that's why they went with John Ross, but there were some other good wideouts taken after him, like Juju Smith-Schuster, Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, and Kenny Golladay. All of those 4 would have been clear upgrades over John Ross. Now, running backs obviously aren't very valuable in today's game, but there were 2 really good running backs that were taken before John Ross at the draft, and then there were a bunch of stud backs that were taken after him too. Leonard Fournette went at 4, and Christian McCaffrey went 8th, the pick right before John Ross. In the 2nd round, both Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon went off the board. Now, of course, Cook's a free agent now, but he was great in Minnesota, and he's coming off of 4 straight 1,100-plus yard seasons. Joe Mixon did have to take a pay cut this offseason, but he's had 3 1,000-yard seasons in Cincinnati and been a top running back in the league. I had to at least bring him up, but yeah, the Bengals drafted him and John Ross in the same draft, so that doesn't really matter much. Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt, and James Conner were all drafted in the 3rd round. Kamara was the Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he's been a Pro Bowler 5 times. He's an elite running back. He's had well over 1,000 yards from scrimmage in every year of his career. You probably could have just lined him up at wide receiver, and he would have been way more productive than John Ross ever was. Kareem Hunt led the league in rushing yards as a rookie with 1,300, but he hasn't been anywhere close to as good since, and of course he was released after a video of him kicking a woman in a hotel came out. Then there's James Conner, who had 973 yards in just 13 games during that 2018 season when Le'Veon Bell was holding out, and he has at least 700 yards in each of the past 3 seasons. Then way late in the 5th round, the Packers took Aaron Jones. He's had 3 1,000-yard seasons in the pros and even led the league in rushing touchdowns in 2019. Running backs aren't very important in today's game, so it's really silly to suggest that the Bengals should have taken one at 9th overall. But in hindsight, a running back or really any other player would have made a bigger impact than Cincinnati, because John Ross was a certified bust.